My husband slapped my best friend for looking at my chest while I was breastfeeding. James slapped Amy so hard her head snapped sideways, all because she glanced at my chest during dinner. We were at our baby's celebration dinner. I was adjusting my nursing top when Amy looked over. I joked, "Want a taste?" We both laughed. It's how we've always been. James stood up and backhanded her across the face. Her body is mine to look at. Only mine. The room went silent. Amy held her cheek, tears forming, and left immediately. His mother actually defended him. He's protecting what's his. I found Amy in the bathroom, a perfect handprint already forming on her face. "What if he hits you next?" she asked. He would never, but the words stuck in my throat. James had been getting worse since my pregnancy. Angry when men looked at me. Furious when I wore anything but baggy clothes. Constantly calling me his. The handprint became a bruise covering half Amy's face. Purple, green, swollen. She told people she fell rather than ruin my marriage. I stayed. 4-month-old baby. No job. James insisted I quit. No money. His name on everything. I slept in the nursery, barely spoke to him. He acted like nothing happened. Just a little slap. You're overreacting. 3 nights later, he came home drunk while I was nursing. Saw me breastfeeding and exploded. Cover yourself. What if someone sees? I'm feeding our daughter in our living room. Your body is mine. Mine to see, touch, control. He grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise. The baby started crying. "Look what you did," he snarled. "You made her cry." After he passed out, I called Amy. She came immediately, saw my bruised arm. "We're leaving. Now." We packed what we could. Baby things, documents, clothes. I left my ring on the counter with a note. "I'm not your property." The next morning, James cycled through screaming, crying, threatening, apologizing. His mother called me terrible for abandoning him over 1 mistake. 2 mistakes. He hit Amy, grabbed me. Boys will be boys. Men who hit women are criminals. Amy helped me file a restraining order. Police photographed everything. James was served at work. Now he's fighting for custody, claiming I'm unstable. My lawyer says document everything. So I document every violation, every drive-by of Amy's apartment where we're staying. His friends harassed me online. Dramatic. Ruined a good man. Over nothing. Yesterday, James texted from a friend's phone. "You're mine forever." I screenshot it, sent it to my lawyer, replied, "I'm nobody's property." But this morning changed everything. Amy was making breakfast when her phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello?" She went pale. "How did you get this number?" She hung up, hands shaking. "Who was that?" "James's ex, Rebecca, the one before you." I'd never heard of Rebecca. "She said she needs to warn you. She's driving here now." Rebecca arrived an hour later. Thin, nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder. "I heard about the restraining order through mutual friends," she said. "I need to show you something." She pulled out her phone. Photos of bruises, black eyes, split lips, police reports, hospital records. This was me. 3 years with James. My stomach dropped. He broke my ribs, fractured my eye socket. Always places covered by clothes, except when he lost control. Why didn't anyone? His parents paid me to disappear. $50,000 to sign an NDA, leave the state, never contact him again. She showed me the agreement, James's father's signature at the bottom. They've done this before. They'll do it again. But the restraining order? I had one too. She pulled up a news article on her phone. Read this. Local woman missing after violating NDA agreement. That's my friend Melissa. She tried to warn James's new girlfriend after me disappeared 2 days after breaking her NDA. You think James? I think his family has money and connections. I'm risking everything telling you this. Amy grabbed my hand. We need to leave. Not just his place, the city. Rebecca nodded. Tonight. Don't tell anyone where you're going. This is insane. My phone buzzed. James's lawyer. My client is offering $100,000 for full custody and your signature on a non-disclosure agreement. You have 24 hours to accept. Rebecca went white. That's how it starts. Take the money or... The door to Amy's apartment exploded open. James stood there, breathing hard. The restraining order says 500 feet. Amy started. Expired an hour ago. Judge overturned it. My lawyer's good. He looked at Rebecca. You broke your NDA. She ran for the back door. James didn't follow her. He stared at me. Pack the baby's things. We're going home. No. He smiled. Yes. Or Rebecca has an accident. Your choice. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. A photo of Rebecca's car. Someone following her. 5 minutes, James said. Choose. I moved toward the baby carrier where my daughter slept, her tiny chest rising and falling in peaceful breaths. My hands shook as I unbuckled the straps and lifted her against my chest. She stirred but didn't wake. I looked at James standing in the doorway with that smile still on his face. I needed time to think, to find some way out of this that didn't end with Rebecca hurt. Or worse, Amy stood frozen near the kitchen, her eyes wide and scared, and I could see her mind working through options. She glanced at the back door, then at James, then at me. But James blocked the only real exit with his body, standing there like a wall between us and freedom. I held my daughter closer and opened my mouth to speak, to stall, to buy us minutes we didn't have. But before I could say anything, James pulled his phone from his pocket and turned the screen toward me. A video played, live footage from inside a car. I could see Rebecca's vehicle through the windshield, her brake lights glowing red at a stoplight. The person holding the camera was right behind her, close enough that I could read her license plate. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a bluff or an empty threat. Someone was actually following her right now, watching her, waiting for James's signal. My hands started shaking harder and my daughter began to fuss against my chest, sensing my fear the way babies do. I looked at that video feed and knew I had no choice at all. Rebecca had risked everything to warn me and now she was in danger because of it. I couldn't let her get hurt because I was too scared to go back. I swallowed hard and forced the words out. I told James I would come home with him right now if he called off whoever was following Rebecca. He smiled wider and made a quick call, speaking just 2 words into the phone. Then he showed me the video again. The car behind Rebecca turned off at the next intersection and disappeared. Relief flooded through me so fast I felt dizzy, but it was mixed with terror because I had just agreed to go back into that house, back under his control. Amy finally found her voice and started to argue. She said I couldn't go with him, that we should call the police, that there had to be another way. But I was already moving, gathering the baby's diaper bag from the couch with shaking fingers. I shoved in diapers, wipes, bottles, anything I could grab quickly. James watched every move I made like a predator watching prey, his eyes tracking my hands as I packed. I forced myself to stay calm even though panic was screaming through my whole body. My daughter started crying now, picking up on all the tension in the room, and I bounced her gently while I worked. Amy kept talking, her voice getting higher and more scared. She grabbed my arm and tried to pull me toward her, away from James. I looked right at her and very quietly mouthed 3 words. Call the police. She blinked and I saw understanding flash across her face. She let go of my arm and stepped back. I slung the diaper bag over my shoulder and walked toward James with my crying baby in my arms. He put his hand on my lower back, possessive and controlling, and guided me out the door. I didn't look back at Amy because I was afraid I would break down completely if I did. James's car sat in the parking lot, the same black sedan he had always driven. He opened the passenger door and waited for me to get in. I buckled the baby into her car seat in the back and climbed into the front. The door closed with a heavy thunk that sounded like a prison cell locking. James got in the driver's side and started the engine. We pulled out of the parking lot in complete silence. My phone was still in my pocket and I pulled it out carefully. Keeping it low where James couldn't see from his side, I opened my messages and found Rebecca's number from earlier. I typed fast with shaking thumbs. He knows about the NDA. Someone was following you. Get somewhere safe. Hide. I'm sorry. I hit send and watched the message go through, but I wasn't fast enough. James glanced over and saw the phone in my hands. He snatched it away from me so fast I didn't have time to react. He didn't even look at what I had sent. He just rolled down his window and threw my phone out onto the highway. I twisted in my seat and watched it hit the pavement and shatter into pieces, plastic and glass scattering across the road. Cars ran over the pieces and crushed them smaller. That phone was my last connection to help, to Amy, to anyone who could get me out. Now it was gone and I was completely cut off. James rolled the window back up and kept driving like nothing had happened. My daughter had stopped crying and fallen back asleep in her car seat. I stared out the window at familiar streets that led back to the house I had escaped from just days ago. It felt like years had passed since I left my ring on the counter with that note. The house looked exactly the same when we pulled into the driveway. Same white siding, same black shutters, same perfectly trimmed lawn that James paid someone to maintain. But standing on the front porch was Estelle, James's mother, wearing a dress and pearls like she was expecting company. She smiled when she saw us, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Those eyes were cold and calculating, watching me like I was a problem she had solved. James parked and came around to open my door. I got the baby out of her car seat and held her close as we walked up to the house. Estelle's smile got bigger and she said how glad she was that I had come to my senses. She said it like I had made some smart decision instead of being forced back here through threats. She touched my arm and guided me inside, talking the whole time about how families need to stick together through hard times. The house smelled the same, like the cleaning products Estelle always used when she came over to help. Everything was exactly where it had been when I left. The furniture, the pictures on the walls, even the mail stacked on the kitchen counter. But what made my stomach turn was when Estelle led me upstairs to the nursery. She had set it up exactly as it was before, like the past few days had never happened. The crib in the same spot, the changing table against the wall, the mobile hanging above with its little animals. She had even put fresh sheets on the crib mattress and restocked all the supplies. She stood there looking proud of herself, expecting me to thank her. I put my daughter in the crib and watched her sleep, and the sight of this room that looked so normal made me feel sick because I knew what it really was. A cage. James appeared in the doorway and Estelle turned to him with that approving look she always gave him. He started talking and she nodded along with everything he said. No phone, he told me. No computer. No leaving the house without him. He would be working from home now to keep an eye on me. The words came out calm and measured, like he was explaining reasonable house rules instead of prison conditions. Estelle kept nodding like this all made perfect sense. I stood there listening and agreed to everything. Yes, I understood. Yes, I would follow the rules. Yes, I knew it was for the best. But inside my head, I was already cataloging details. The spare key hidden under the planter by the back door. The neighbor's schedule, when they left for work and came home. The walking path behind the house that led to the main road. The window in the laundry room that didn't lock properly. I filed away every piece of information that might help me escape later, because I knew this wasn't permanent. I couldn't let it be permanent. Right now, I just needed to focus on keeping my daughter safe in this immediate moment. James seemed satisfied with my compliance. He left to make some calls and Estelle stayed with me, helping me unpack the diaper bag and put things away. She talked the whole time about how much better this was, how I would see that James only wanted what was best for us. I made agreeable sounds and kept my real thoughts locked inside. That first night back, I slept in the nursery with my baby. I told James I wanted to be close to her in case she needed me during the night, and he allowed it. After he went to bed, I pushed the changing table in front of the door. It wasn't heavy enough to actually stop him if he decided to come in, but it would make noise and give me warning. I lay on the small daybed against the wall and stared at the ceiling for hours. Every sound made me jump. The house settling, the heat kicking on, a car passing outside. Each noise could be James coming to the door. My daughter slept peacefully in her crib, completely unaware of the danger we were in. She made little baby sounds in her sleep. Soft sighs and tiny movements. I watched her in the dim light from the nightlight and promised myself I would get us out. I barely slept at all that night. When I did drift off, it was only for minutes before jerking awake again, my heart pounding. But my daughter slept through everything, safe in her crib, and that was all that mattered. The next morning came too fast. I heard James moving around downstairs, making coffee, starting his day. I fed the baby and changed her diaper, doing normal morning things that felt wrong in this situation. Then I heard voices at the front door, James's voice, and another voice I didn't recognize at first. Then I heard Amy. She was demanding to see me, her voice loud and angry. I crept to the top of the stairs with the baby in my arms and listened. James's voice was calm and smooth as he explained that I had come home voluntarily and didn't want visitors. He sounded so reasonable, so concerned. I could see Amy through the railing, standing on the front porch, and her bruised face looked even worse than before. The purple had spread and darkened, but she wasn't alone. A man in a suit stood next to her. Detective Garza, I realized. Amy must have called the police just like I told her to. Hope sparked in my chest, but I stayed frozen at the top of the stairs, holding my breath. Detective Garza said he needed to speak with me directly. James couldn't refuse without looking suspicious, so he stepped aside and let them in. I heard him call my name, telling me to come downstairs. I forced my legs to move, walking down the steps with my daughter against my shoulder. Amy's eyes locked on mine, and I could see the question there. Are you okay? I tried to make my face blank. Detective Garza introduced himself properly and asked if I was being held here against my will. The words James had coached me earlier that morning came back. I told the detective I was fine. I said I chose to come home. I explained that I had been upset and made some bad decisions, but I was thinking clearly now. The exact words James had made me practice. But while I said them, I stared at Detective Garza and tried to communicate the truth with my eyes. Please see through this. Please know I'm lying. Please help me. But I didn't know if he could read what I wasn't saying out loud. Amy looked like she wanted to scream. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she stayed quiet. Detective Garza asked a few more questions, and I answered them all the way James wanted. Finally, he handed me his card and told me to call if I needed anything. Then he and Amy left. I watched through the window as they walked back to his car. Amy looked back at the house once before getting in. Then they drove away. After they left, James was furious. His calm mask cracked, and I could see the rage underneath. He paced the living room, his hands flexing like he wanted to hit something. He pulled out his phone and made a call, and I heard him ask for Ashton Willis, his lawyer. He started talking fast, describing Amy as unstable and obsessed with breaking up our marriage. He said she was harassing us, bringing police to our home, refusing to accept that I had come back voluntarily. The lies flowed so smoothly that I realized this wasn't the first time he had done this. He had practiced this, refined it, probably used these same tactics before with Rebecca and whoever else came before her. He talked about filing harassment charges, about getting a restraining order against Amy. He nodded along with whatever Ashton was saying on the other end. Then he hung up and looked at me. He smiled that cold smile again and told me Amy had made a big mistake. I held my daughter tighter and said nothing, because there was nothing I could say that wouldn't make things worse. I just stood there and let him talk, already planning my next move in the back of my mind. The next morning, James left for his lawyer meeting, and Estelle showed up 10 minutes later like she'd been waiting around the corner. She walked through the house checking windows and doors while I fed the baby in the nursery. She settled into the armchair across from me and started talking about how marriage requires sacrifice and loyalty. Her voice had this practiced quality like she'd given this speech before. She talked about supporting your husband through hard times and how modern women don't understand commitment anymore. I nodded along and made appropriate sounds while the baby nursed. Then Estelle mentioned casually that she'd had to learn these lessons herself when James's father was alive. She said sometimes men get frustrated and wives need to be understanding. She touched her wrist absently while she said it, and I saw a thin white scar there. That's when I understood James didn't invent this behavior. He learned it watching his father, and Estelle stayed and defended it, and now she was trying to teach me to do the same thing. The realization made my skin crawl, but I kept my face neutral and thanked her for the advice. After Estelle finally left, I put the baby down for her nap and went to the nursery closet to grab extra blankets. I was reaching for the top shelf when my hand hit something hard in the back corner. I pulled out an old tablet covered in dust that must have been shoved back there and forgotten. My hands shook as I turned it on. The battery was dead, but I found the charger in a drawer and plugged it in. 20 minutes later, it powered up and still had internet access through the house Wi-Fi. I opened the email app with my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. I composed a message to Verity using careful words that wouldn't trigger suspicion if James somehow saw it. I wrote about needing to discuss our daughter's medical records and mentioned specific details about the house layout and James's schedule that Verity would recognize as a call for help. I hit send and watched the message go through. Then I deleted the browser history and cleared the email cache and powered the tablet down. I found a large stuffed elephant on the shelf and carefully opened the back seam. I slid the tablet inside and sewed it back up with thread from my sewing kit. The elephant went back on the shelf looking innocent and harmless. 2 days crawled by in the same suffocating pattern. James set up his laptop at the dining room table and worked from home. He could see into the kitchen and the hallway to the nursery from there. Every time I moved, he looked up and tracked me with his eyes. I changed diapers and made bottles and did laundry while he watched. Estelle came by every afternoon with meals she'd prepared. She'd set the food on the counter and make comments about how much healthier I looked now. She said I had color in my cheeks again, and the house felt warm and lived in. She told me this was where I belonged, taking care of my family. I smiled and thanked her for the food. I complimented her cooking and agreed that being home felt right. But inside my chest, this rage was building like pressure in a sealed container. Every smile felt like swallowing glass. Every thank you tasted like poison. I kept it all locked down tight and played the role she wanted to see. On the third day, someone knocked on the door. James answered it, and I heard a woman's voice say she was from Child Services doing a wellness check. James invited her in with perfect politeness. She introduced herself and said she just needed to see that the baby was healthy and the home environment was safe. James stayed right next to me the entire visit. The social worker asked questions about feeding schedules and sleep routines. James answered most of them, even though she directed the questions at me. She asked to see the nursery, and we took her upstairs. She looked around at the crib and changing table and asked if she could hold the baby. I handed over my daughter and watched the social worker examine her gently. She checked for any signs of distress or poor care. Then she handed the baby back and smiled. She told James she could see this was a loving home. As she turned to leave, she stumbled slightly and grabbed my arm to steady herself. I felt paper press into my palm. I closed my fingers around it fast. The social worker apologized for being clumsy and headed downstairs. After she left, I went to the bathroom and unfolded the tiny note. "Help is being arranged," it said in small print. I flushed it down the toilet and washed my hands twice. That afternoon, while the baby napped, I was straightening up the nursery when I noticed a small black device tucked behind the baby monitor. It was about the size of a quarter with a tiny red light. I picked it up carefully and turned it over. A recording device. My stomach dropped. I checked the bookshelf and found another one wedged between books. A third was stuck under the changing table. James had been recording every word I said in this room. Every phone call I might have tried to make. Every conversation with visitors. I put all the devices back exactly where I found them. From now on, I only talked about baby care and household tasks when I was in the nursery or anywhere else in the house. My real thoughts stayed locked inside my head where he couldn't reach them. The house phone rang while James was in the shower that evening. I answered it fast before it could wake the baby. Rebecca's voice came through in a whisper. She said she'd gone into hiding, but she sent evidence to Detective Garza before she disappeared. She told me James's family had a lawyer named Ashton Willis who specialized in making problems go away. She started to say something else, but the line went dead. I hung up and stood there staring at the phone. Ashton Willis. I needed to remember that name. That night, James came home with flowers. Pink roses in a clear vase, He set them on the kitchen counter and told me he was sorry for being so strict lately. He said he just loved me. So much that the thought of losing me made him crazy. He pulled me close and kissed my forehead. His hands were gentle on my back. I recognized this from what Rebecca had described. The cycle of abuse. Explosion. Then remorse. Then the honeymoon phase where everything seems perfect. Then the tension builds again until the next explosion. I was in the honeymoon phase now. I leaned into his embrace and told him I understood. I said I loved him too. The lies came easier than they should have. Over the next few days, I started complying with every single rule James set. I asked permission before doing anything. I wore the clothes he picked out, I initiated affection, and acted happy when he touched me. I made his favorite meals and kept the house spotless. Estelle noticed the change when she came by. She told me approvingly that I seemed to have adjusted my attitude. She said I looked like a proper wife now. I smiled and thanked her for her guidance. Inside, I was watching everything. I noted what time James left for work and when he came home. I tracked Estelle's visiting schedule. I observed which doors he locked and which windows had alarms. I was gathering information while they thought I was breaking down. The baby had a checkup scheduled at the pediatrician. James drove us there and came inside to the waiting room. When they called our name, he stood up to come back with us. The nurse told him only one parent could come due to space in the exam room. He hesitated but sat back down. I carried the baby down the hallway following the nurse. While she was weighing the baby, I pulled out the tiny note I'd written that morning. I pressed it into the nurse's hand when she reached for the baby's chart. Her eyes went wide, but she nodded slightly and slipped the note into her pocket. The note said I was being held against my will and gave Verity's contact information. I prayed she would actually call instead of throwing it away. The nurse finished the exam and told me the baby was developing perfectly. We went back to the waiting room where James stood up immediately. He put his hand on my lower back as we walked to the car. 3 days later, Ashton Willis came to the house. James told me to go upstairs while they talked business. I took the baby to the nursery and closed the door. Then I crept back out and sat at the top of the stairs where I could hear their voices from the dining room below. Ashton was explaining custody strategy. He said judges in family court were often sympathetic to fathers' rights, especially when mothers appeared unstable. He mentioned getting statements from Estelle about my erratic behavior. He talked about my history of abandoning the home and making false accusations. James added that I'd been showing signs of postpartum depression. They discussed medical evaluations and psychiatric assessments. Ashton said they could build a strong case that I was mentally unfit to have primary custody. I listened to them plan how to take my daughter away and paint me as crazy. Every word felt like a nail in a coffin they were building around me. I went back to the nursery before they finished and held my baby close while she slept in my arms. The next afternoon, Estelle arrived with 3 large photo albums tucked under her arm. She walked straight into the living room and set them on the coffee table without asking. James told me to sit with his mother and listen. I carried the baby over and sat on the couch while Estelle opened the first album. Page after page showed James as a little boy birthday parties with perfect decorations, school pictures where he smiled with his teeth showing, family vacations at beaches and theme parks. Estelle pointed to each photo and told me stories about what a gentle child he was, how he never threw tantrums, how he always shared his toys, how he cried when he saw hurt animals. Her voice had this practiced quality like she'd rehearsed these stories. I nodded and made the right sounds while she talked. Then she opened the second album and I saw James as a teenager, still smiling in every photo, still looking perfect. Estelle turned a page and there was a family photo from some holiday. James stood next to his father. I stared at the man in the picture. He had the same build as James, the same jaw, the same way of standing with his shoulders back. But it was his eyes that made my breath catch, cold and flat even while he smiled. The exact same eyes James had when he looked at me now. Estelle kept talking about her wonderful son, but I couldn't stop looking at that photo of his father. Understanding hit me like cold water. James learned this. Someone taught him how to be this way. 2 days later, James told me to dust his office. He sat at the dining room table where he could watch the hallway while I worked. I took the cleaning supplies and went into the office. I started with the bookshelves like he'd expect. Then I moved to the desk. I wiped down the surface and opened the top drawer to dust inside. Legal documents filled the drawer. Property deeds. I pulled one out carefully. The family owned a house in another state. I kept looking. Another deed for a cabin in the mountains. A third property in a different state entirely. My hands shook as I photographed each page with the hidden tablet I'd tucked into my cleaning caddy. Then I found a folder marked settlements. I opened it. Page after page of legal agreements. Payments to unnamed parties. Confidentiality clauses. The amounts made me dizzy. 50,000 here, 75,000 there, 100,000. All signed by James's father years ago. Some signed by James more recently. I photographed every page I could. My heart pounded so hard I thought James would hear it from the dining room. I put everything back exactly where I found it. Made sure the edges lined up. Closed the drawer the same amount it had been open. Then I dusted the rest of the office and carried my supplies back out. James looked up from his laptop. I kept my face blank and walked to the kitchen to put the supplies away. The next morning, someone knocked hard on the front door. James answered it. Detective Garza stood on the porch with 2 uniformed officers. He held up a warrant. I watched from the top of the stairs. James read the warrant with his jaw tight. Then he stepped back and let them in. His voice stayed calm and polite. He asked what they were looking for. Detective Garza said they'd received evidence about threats and intimidation. They needed to search the property and vehicles. James nodded like he understood, like he had nothing to hide. I went to the nursery window and looked down at the driveway. 2 officers were searching James's car. They opened the trunk, looked under the seats. One of them pulled out a large evidence bag and put something inside. Then another bag. I counted 4 evidence bags total before they finished with the car. Detective Garza came upstairs. He knocked on the nursery door. I opened it with the baby in my arms. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he asked if I was okay. I said yes. He asked if I was here voluntarily. I said yes because James was standing right behind him in the hallway. Detective Garza's eyes told me he knew I was lying, but he couldn't do anything about it. He searched the nursery quickly, looked in the closet, under the crib. Then he left. I heard them downstairs for another 20 minutes. Finally, the front door closed. I looked out the window and watched them drive away with their evidence bags. For the first time in days, something that felt almost like hope moved in my chest. James came into the nursery as soon as the police cars disappeared. He closed the door behind him, locked it, walked toward me until I backed up against the changing table. He got close enough that I could smell the alcohol on his breath even though it wasn't even noon yet. His voice came out quiet and dangerous. He asked what I told the police. I said I hadn't spoken to them since the first visit. My voice shook. I couldn't help it. He leaned closer, asked if I was sure about that. I nodded. Tears started running down my face without permission. The fear must have looked real enough because it was real. He stared at me for another long moment. Then he stepped back, told me to clean myself up, unlocked the door and left. I sat on the floor and held the baby while my whole body shook. He'd been drinking. He'd been that close. And he'd chosen not to hit me. That scared me almost more than if he had. An hour later, Estelle's car pulled into the driveway. She practically ran to the front door. I heard her voice in the kitchen, sharp and worried. I'd left the baby monitor on deliberately, placed it where they wouldn't see it. I sat in the nursery and listened to every word. Estelle said the family's lawyer was concerned. Very concerned. Detective Garza was digging into everything. He'd contacted 3 other women besides Rebecca. Women who'd signed agreements. Women who'd taken money. James asked if any of them were talking. Estelle said she didn't know yet. But the lawyer thought exposure was coming. They needed to be prepared. James's voice got hard. He said they'd handled this before. They'd handle it again. Estelle reminded him that his father wasn't here anymore to make problems disappear. James said he was perfectly capable of handling his own problems. Then Estelle said something I had to replay in my head to believe. She said there were 3 other women, total 3 besides Rebecca. 4 victims before me. The number made me feel sick. That afternoon, James told me I could call Amy. He sat right next to me on the couch while I dialed. Put the phone on speaker so he could hear everything. Amy answered on the first ring. Her voice sounded exhausted. I asked how she was doing. She said she was okay but tired. I told her I was fine, that I'd come home to work things out, that I appreciated her help, but James and I needed to handle things as a couple. The words tasted like poison. Amy was quiet for a moment. Then she said she understood, that she'd be there if I needed anything. I thanked her and told her I'd call again soon. Before we hung up, Amy said she'd been getting messages. Strange messages from numbers she didn't recognize, telling her to mind her own business, telling her to stop interfering. I looked at James. His face showed nothing but concern. He asked Amy if she'd reported the messages to police. She said yes. He said good, that she should definitely keep reporting any harassment. We said goodbye. James took the phone from my hand and turned it off, told me I'd handled that very well. The next day, a woman I didn't know came to the house. She rang the doorbell around 2 in the afternoon. James answered. The woman said she was an old family friend, that she'd heard he'd gotten married and wanted to stop by with congratulations. James invited her in. His voice was too polite, too careful. Estelle came down from upstairs, and I saw her face go tight when she saw the woman. They all went into the living room. I stayed in the kitchen, but I could hear them talking. The woman's voice was familiar somehow, even though I'd never met her. She mentioned property taxes, asked about the cabin. Estelle cut her off and suggested they talk privately. They moved to James's office. I crept closer to the door, heard Estelle ask about payments. The woman said police had contacted her last week, asked about an agreement she'd signed years ago. James said they'd take care of it. The woman's voice got harder. She said she'd kept quiet for 5 years, but if Detective Garza was digging up everything anyway, she wasn't going to prison for them. Estelle offered more money. The woman laughed, Said money didn't matter if she ended up like the others. Then she left. I went back to the kitchen before they came out of the office. But I understood. Another victim. Another woman who'd taken money to stay quiet. And now she was scared enough to warn them. That night, James touched my shoulder while I was washing dishes. My whole body went rigid. I couldn't breathe. My vision tunneled. The panic attack hit so fast I didn't have time to hide it. James noticed immediately. He grabbed my arm, asked what was wrong with me. I couldn't answer. Couldn't get air into my lungs. He let go and I collapsed against the counter. Estelle came into the kitchen, looked at me gasping for breath, then looked at James. She said I clearly wasn't handling the stress well, that I needed help, maybe medication for anxiety. James agreed, said we should make an appointment with a doctor, get me evaluated. I finally got my breathing under control, told them I was fine, just tired. Estelle patted my hand, said lots of new mothers struggle, that there was no shame in needing medication. I saw exactly what they were doing, building a story, making me look unstable, creating evidence they could use in court. I forced myself to smile, said maybe she was right, that I'd think about seeing someone, all while my mind screamed at me to run. The next afternoon, James and Estelle went outside to look at something in the garden. I watched them from the kitchen window. They were far enough away they couldn't see inside. I ran to the nursery, pulled the tablet from its hiding spot inside the stuffed bear. My hands shook as I opened the email to Verity. I typed everything I'd overheard. The 3 other women besides Rebecca who'd signed agreements. The properties in 3 states, including the cabin in the mountains. The woman who'd visited yesterday. The conversation about Detective Garza digging into all of them. Estelle's panic about exposure. The recording devices I'd found throughout the house. I attached the photos of the legal documents I'd taken from James's office, included every name I'd heard mentioned. Then I cleared the browser history, deleted the sent folder, made sure nothing showed I'd been online. I stuffed the tablet back into the bear and arranged it exactly how it had been. Went back downstairs just as James and Estelle came in through the back door. James asked what I'd been doing. I said I was checking on the baby. He nodded. Didn't suspect anything. I'd gotten away with it. 2 days later, a woman in a gray suit came to the house. She introduced herself as the court-appointed mediator, said she was here to assess the custody situation. James welcomed her in like she was an honored guest, offered her coffee, showed her around the house, pointed out the nursery he'd set up, the baby's toys, the family photos on the walls. He talked about how much he loved being a father, how he worked from home so he could be present, how he was worried about me. The mediator asked him what concerned him. James sighed, said I'd been acting erratic since the baby was born, that I'd left suddenly with no warning, that I'd made accusations he'd never hurt me, that I seemed paranoid and anxious all the time. He said it so smoothly, so convincingly. Then the mediator asked to speak with me alone. We sat in the living room. She asked how I was doing. I tried to act normal, tried to seem stable and calm, but I was so exhausted from constant fear, from pretending everything was fine, from watching every word. My answers came out flat, disconnected. I saw her writing notes, saw the way she looked at me, like she was cataloging symptoms, like she was checking boxes on a list of unstable behaviors. When she left, I knew exactly what her report would say, that James seemed like a concerned father, that I seemed like I was struggling. The truth didn't matter, only what she saw in that one visit, and what she saw was exactly what James wanted her to see. 2 days later, the house phone rang while I was feeding the baby in the nursery. James answered downstairs, and I heard his voice change, becoming concerned and sympathetic. He called up to me and said Detective Garza needed to speak with me. My hands shook as I took the phone. The detective's voice was careful and professional as he told me Amy had been attacked outside her apartment last night by 2 men. They beat her badly enough that she ended up in the emergency room with a broken arm and more bruises covering her face and ribs. The men told her to stop interfering in other people's marriages before they left her bleeding on the pavement. I felt my stomach drop and my vision went blurry around the edges. I looked at James, who stood in the doorway watching me. His face showed perfect concern, his eyebrows drawn together with worry. He asked if Amy was okay, and said how terrible it was that the city had become so dangerous. I watched his performance knowing he had arranged every bit of it. Detective Garza said Amy was stable and recovering, but she wanted me to know what happened. After I hung up, James put his hand on my shoulder and told me he was sorry about my friend. The touch made my skin crawl, but I forced myself not to pull away. That afternoon, while James worked in his office and Estelle was in the kitchen, I went to use the bathroom. Something caught my eye near the ceiling, a tiny black dot that didn't belong there. I stood on the toilet to look closer, and my blood went cold when I saw the small camera lens hidden in the smoke detector. I checked the bedroom next and found another one tucked into the bookshelf pointing at the bed. My legs went weak and I had to sit down on the floor. James had been recording everything. Every time I nursed my daughter. Every time I changed clothes. Every private moment I thought I had was watched and saved somewhere. The violation made me physically sick, and I barely made it back to the toilet before I threw up. But I couldn't let him know I found them. I flushed the toilet and washed my face and went back to my daily routine while feeling his eyes on me through those lenses. Every movement felt exposed and dirty. I changed the baby's diaper knowing he was watching. I got dressed in the closet knowing he could see. The cameras turned my own home into a prison where even my body wasn't my own anymore. 3 days later, a process server came to the door while we were eating lunch. James signed for the papers and his face went dark red as he read them. Verity had managed to get an emergency hearing scheduled, and James had to appear in court in 3 days. He slammed the papers down on the table hard enough to make the dishes jump. Estelle picked them up and read through them, her mouth getting tighter with each page. James turned to me and asked how my lawyer got such detailed information about the house and our daily routine. His voice was quiet and dangerous. I kept my face completely blank and said I didn't know, that I hadn't been able to contact anyone. Terror ran through me that he would find the tablet hidden in the stuffed bear. He stared at me for a long minute, and I forced myself to meet his eyes without flinching. Finally, he looked away and told Estelle they needed to call Ashton Willis immediately. That night, Estelle moved into the guest room with 2 suitcases. She told me cheerfully that she would be staying until after the court hearing to help with the baby and provide support. But I knew exactly what she was really there for. Round-the-clock supervision. I lost even the small moments of privacy I'd had before when James was in his office or asleep. Estelle watched me constantly with cold calculation in her eyes. She followed me from room to room. She sat in the nursery while I fed the baby. She stood outside the bathroom door. I understood then that she wasn't just enabling James. She was actively participating in keeping me trapped. She wanted me broken and compliant, so her son could have his perfect family. As the court date got closer, James's behavior became increasingly erratic. He started drinking heavily every night, sitting in the living room with a bottle while he raged about ungrateful wives and interfering lawyers who didn't understand family loyalty. His words got louder and angrier as the nights went on. I kept the baby in the nursery with the door locked, listening to his voice rise and fall through the walls. Twice he came upstairs and pounded on the nursery door demanding to see his daughter. The first time he yelled that she was his child and I had no right to keep her from him. The second time he just beat on the door with his fists until the wood shook in its frame. Both times Estelle talked him down, her voice calm and soothing as she led him back downstairs. I sat on the floor with my back against the door and my daughter in my arms, praying the lock would hold. The night before the court hearing, James came into the nursery after I'd put the baby down to sleep. He pulled a chair close to where I sat and told me exactly what I was going to say to the judge. That I had postpartum depression after the baby was born. That I left voluntarily because I wasn't thinking clearly. That I came back voluntarily because I realized my family needed me. That I wanted to work on our marriage and keep our family together. He made me repeat the words back to him over and over. Each time I stumbled or my voice shook, he made me start again. We sat there for over an hour while I rehearsed the lies until I could say them without crying. My throat was raw and my voice was flat by the time he was satisfied. Then he stood up and walked to the door. I heard the lock click from the outside and realized he'd installed a new one that locked from the hallway. I was trapped in the nursery with my sleeping baby and no way out until he decided to let me go. I didn't sleep that night. Just sat in the rocking chair watching my daughter breathe and trying to prepare myself for what was coming. At the courthouse the next morning, I was surrounded by James and his family. Estelle held my elbow as we walked through the parking lot. James's hand stayed on my lower back, guiding me through the doors. Ashton Willis met us in the hallway outside the courtroom and pulled me aside. He went over my testimony one more time, his voice low and urgent. He told me to stay calm, to speak clearly, to remember that I wanted my family back together. James stood close enough that I could feel the heat from his body. Then the courtroom doors opened and we went inside. The judge was a woman with gray hair pulled back tight. She looked at all of us over her reading glasses as we took our seats. Verity sat at the other table, and when she saw me, her eyes widened slightly. I knew I must look terrible. I hadn't slept. I'd barely eaten. My clothes hung loose because I'd lost weight from stress. The judge asked me to approach the witness stand, and I walked up on shaking legs. She asked me directly if I was being held against my will. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. I looked at James sitting there with his perfect, concerned expression. I looked at Ashton Willis with his expensive suit and his confident smile. I looked at Estelle watching me with cold warning in her eyes. Then I looked at Verity and saw her slight nod. I opened my mouth and the words that came out weren't the ones James had made me rehearse. I told the judge I was being held prisoner in my own home, that there were cameras in the bathroom and bedroom recording me, that my friend had been attacked by men James sent, that there were other women before me who'd signed agreements to stay quiet, that James's mother was helping keep me trapped, that I feared for my life and my daughter's safety. I watched James's perfect mask crack as I spoke. His face went from concerned to shocked to furious. He started to stand, but Ashton Willis grabbed his arm. The judge held up her hand for silence and asked me more questions. I answered everyone truthfully while my voice got stronger. I told her about Rebecca and the NDA, about finding the legal documents, about the recordings Detective Garza had seized, about everything I'd been too scared to say before. The judge's face got harder with each answer. When I finished, she ordered an immediate investigation and granted me temporary custody right there. She issued a new restraining order and called for court security. James exploded out of his chair and tried to reach me. He was screaming that I was his wife and I belonged to him and I couldn't do this. It took 3 security officers to restrain him. Verity grabbed my arm and rushed me toward a side door. I could hear James still screaming threats as we ran down a back hallway. Detective Garza was waiting at a side entrance with a patrol car running. Verity handed me and the baby into the back seat and told me she'd meet us at the shelter. As we pulled away, I could still hear James's voice echoing from inside the courthouse. Detective Garza drove fast through city streets while I held my daughter and tried to process that we'd actually gotten away. He took us directly to a domestic violence shelter on the other side of town. The building looked like a regular house from the outside, but it had security cameras and reinforced doors. A woman met us at the entrance and introduced herself as Madison Cooley, the shelter director. She had kind eyes and a firm handshake. She led us inside to a small private room and explained the shelter rules. No one could know we were here. No visitors without approval. No posting on social media. No contact with James or his family. Security protocols for coming and going. Resources available for legal help and counseling. As she talked, I felt the fear and tension I'd been holding for weeks finally break through. I started crying and couldn't stop. Madison put her arm around my shoulders while I sobbed with my daughter in my arms. For the first time in weeks, we were behind locked doors that James didn't control. We were actually safe for the moment. Madison gave me time to cry myself out, then showed us to a small bedroom with a crib already set up. She brought me water and tissues and told me to rest. After she left, I sat on the bed holding my daughter and feeling the quiet safety of the room around us. Later that evening, Madison brought me a new phone with a restricted number that couldn't be traced. I called Amy and she answered on the first ring. When she heard my voice, she started crying. I could hear the relief and fear in her sobs. She told me about the attack, about her broken arm and bruised ribs, about the men's threats. But she also told me she'd already talked to Detective Garza and given a full statement. She promised to testify about everything she'd witnessed, no matter what it cost her. I told her how brave she was for not giving up on me even when it put her in danger. She said that's what real friends do, and she'd do it all again. We talked until my new phone's battery got low and I had to hang up. I put my daughter in the crib and watched her sleep in the dim light from the hallway. For the first time since going back to James's house, I let myself believe we might actually survive this. The next morning, Detective Garza came back to the shelter with a thick folder and a recording device. Madison brought us to a small office with a table and chairs. The detective sat across from me and clicked his pen. He asked me to start from the beginning and tell him everything. I talked for 3 hours straight while he took notes. I told him about the recording devices hidden in the nursery and bathroom. I described the documents I found in James's office about properties and settlements. I explained how I photographed pages with the hidden tablet before putting everything back exactly where it was. Detective Garza nodded and wrote down every detail. He asked specific questions about dates and times. When did I find the first camera? Which drawer held the legal papers? What did the settlement documents say exactly? I answered everything I could remember. My daughter slept in her carrier beside my chair. When I finished talking, my throat was dry and my hands were shaking. Detective Garza told me they were building cases for kidnapping because James held me against my will. Unlawful imprisonment for the same reason, assault for grabbing my arm, and for what he did to Amy. Stalking for the drive-bys and threats. He said Rebecca agreed to testify despite her NDA. She was willing to risk the settlement money if it meant stopping James's family from hurting more women. That made me cry because she was risking everything to help me. The second day of interviews, Detective Garza brought new information. The woman who came to the house during my imprisonment was named Liliana Sanderson. She was one of 4 previous victims who all signed NDAs with James's family. Now that they knew about each other, they were all cooperating with police. Liliana had been with James 6 years ago. Another woman named Carol dated him 4 years back. Then Rebecca 3 years ago. Then someone between Rebecca and me whose name I didn't catch. Each of them had similar stories. Controlling behavior that got worse over time. Physical violence that escalated. Threats when they tried to leave. Then James's parents showing up with a lawyer and a check. $50,000 to sign papers and disappear. Detective Garza spread photos across the table. Hospital records showing broken bones and black eyes. Police reports that were filed, then mysteriously dropped. Bank statements showing large payments from James's father's accounts. Together, all our stories painted a clear picture. This was not just one bad relationship. This was a pattern enabled by family money. James hurt women and his parents paid to cover it up. For the first time, I actually believed he might face real punishment. Not just a slap on the wrist or a fine. His family could pay real consequences that might keep him away from me and my daughter. 3 days after the court hearing, I was in the shelter common room with my daughter when the security alarm went off. Madison rushed in and told everyone to move away from windows. Through the glass, I saw James's car in the parking lot. He was walking toward the building. The restraining order said he had to stay 500 feet away, but here he was. Madison was already on the phone with police. James reached the front door and started pounding on it. The reinforced lock held. He yelled that I was his wife and I had to come out, that I belonged to him and no judge could change that. Security cameras recorded everything. Other women in the shelter moved their children to back rooms, and I stood at the window holding my baby and watching James lose control. He kicked the door, punched the glass, screamed threats about what he would do when he got inside. But the security system worked exactly like Madison said it would. Police cars pulled up within 4 minutes. Officers got out with hands on their weapons. James was still yelling when they grabbed his arms. He fought them as they pushed him against his car. I watched through the window as they put handcuffs on his wrists. He kept screaming that I was his wife, that I belonged to him, that they could not do this. His voice sounded high and desperate. The words that used to scare me just sounded pathetic now, small and weak. The officers put him in the back of their car. One of them came inside to take statements from Madison and me. I described exactly what I saw and heard. The officer wrote it all down. He said James would be charged with violating the restraining order. That was a criminal offense that could mean jail time. The next day, Verity called to tell me about the bail hearing Ashton Willis tried to get James released. He argued that James was a respected member of the community, that he had no prior criminal record, that he was not a flight risk. But the prosecutor presented evidence. Photos of my bruises, Amy's hospital records, statements from Rebecca and the other victims. The judge looked at everything and denied bail. She said James posed a clear threat to public safety, that given his family's money and resources, he was absolutely a flight risk. Detective Garza called me after the hearing. He said James would be held for at least 30 days while the investigation continued. Maybe longer, depending on what charges the prosecutor filed. For 30 days, I did not have to look over my shoulder. I did not have to check every car that drove past. I did not have to wake up at night wondering if James found where I was staying. 30 days to build a new life without constant fear. Madison sat with me the next morning and helped me fill out forms for emergency assistance food stamps so I could buy groceries, medical coverage for me and my daughter, cash assistance to help with basic needs. She explained each form and what documents I needed. Then she showed me information about job training programs. There was one for medical billing that met 3 times a week, another for office administration, a third for early childhood education. All of them provided childcare during classes. I could bring my daughter and someone would watch her while I learned. For the first time since my pregnancy, I saw an actual path forward. Not just surviving day to day. Not just hiding and hoping James did not find me real skills that could get me a job. A way to support myself and my daughter without depending on anyone. I chose the medical billing program because it started the following week. Madison helped me register and set up the childcare. She told me the shelter could provide bus passes so I could get to class. That they had a small fund for work clothes if I needed them. I felt something shift inside me. Not hope exactly. More like possibility. Like maybe I could actually do this. That afternoon, Verity came to the shelter with more paperwork. She was filing for divorce and sole custody. Given everything that happened, she was confident the court would rule in my favor. The criminal charges against James made a huge difference. The evidence of abuse and imprisonment. The multiple victims coming forward. The judge would see that James was dangerous. Verity said he probably would not get unsupervised visitation even if he avoided prison. Maybe supervised visits once he finished whatever sentence he got. Maybe nothing at all if we could prove he was a threat to our daughter. The process would take months, maybe a year or more. But every day that passed with documented separation made my case stronger. Every day I lived independently. Every job training class I attended. Every therapy session. Every way I proved I could provide a stable home for my daughter. All of it built evidence that I was the fit parent that James was not. Verity told me to keep records of everything. Save every document. Note every milestone. Take photos of our life at the shelter and later wherever we moved. Create a paper trail showing my daughter was safe and cared for and thriving away from her father. The following week, I had my first therapy appointment. The shelter connected me with a counselor who worked specifically with domestic violence survivors. Her office was in a building near the shelter. Small and quiet with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. She asked me to tell her what brought me there. I started talking and could not stop everything poured out. How James changed during my pregnancy. The control and jealousy. Hitting Amy, grabbing my arm, forcing me back to his house, the cameras and recordings, being locked in the nursery, the fear that never went away. When I finished, the counselor looked at me with kind eyes. She said what happened was not my fault, that my responses were normal survival strategies, that I did what I needed to do to protect myself and my baby. She explained that trauma changes your brain, makes you hypervigilant and anxious, makes you expect danger even when you are safe. The therapy sessions would be hard because I had to relive everything. talk about the worst moments over and over. But that was how I would process the trauma instead of just carrying it. How I would learn to feel safe again. We scheduled weekly appointments. I left that first session feeling exhausted, but somehow lighter. Like maybe I did not have to carry all of this alone. 2 weeks after James's arrest, Rebecca came to visit me at the shelter. Madison approved her as a safe visitor. We sat in the common room with my daughter playing on a blanket between us. Rebecca looked different from the last time I saw her. Less scared, more solid somehow. We cried together about everything we both went through. She told me breaking her NDA might cost her the settlement money. James's parents were threatening to sue her for violating the agreement. Their lawyer sent letters demanding she stop cooperating with police. But Rebecca said seeing James arrested made it all worth it, knowing he was locked up and could not hurt anyone else. I told her she saved my life by warning me that if she had not risked everything to tell me the truth, I might still be trapped in that house. Or worse. We held hands and cried, and my daughter crawled between us making baby sounds. Rebecca asked if she could visit regularly, if we could stay friends after this was over. I said yes immediately. She was the only person who truly understood what James was capable of, what his family would do to protect him. 3 weeks after my escape, Amy was released from the hospital. Her arm was in a cast and her face still showed fading bruises, yellow and green where the purple had been. She came to the shelter as soon as she could walk without help. Madison let her in and we met in the common room. Amy moved slowly and carefully. Her ribs were still healing, but she smiled when she saw me. We sat together on the couch with my daughter between us. The baby reached for Amy's cast and patted it gently. Amy told me she would do it all again, taking me in when I left James, calling the police, everything that led to her attack. She said that is what real friendship means, being there even when it is hard, even when it is dangerous. I told her I would spend the rest of my life being grateful for her courage, that she could have turned me away, but she did not. She risked everything to help me and my daughter get free. We sat together for hours talking and watching the baby play, making plans for when I moved out of the shelter. Amy said I could stay with her again if I needed to, that her door was always open. 4 weeks after the court hearing, I got a call from the prosecutor's office. They wanted me to testify at a grand jury hearing. The grand jury would decide if there was enough evidence to indict James on the felony charges. The prosecutor explained that grand jury testimony was secret. James and his lawyer would not be there. It was just me and the prosecutor and the jury members. I agreed immediately. I wanted James held accountable for everything he did. Not just to me, but to Rebecca and Liliana and all the others. Verity came to the shelter that evening to prepare me. She explained what kinds of questions the prosecutor would ask, how to answer clearly and calmly. She told me to focus on facts, not emotions, to describe what happened without breaking down. We practiced for 2 hours. She asked me the hard questions, made me tell the story over and over until I could get through it without crying, until my voice stayed steady when I talked about being locked in the nursery, about the cameras in the bathroom, about James's hands on my arm. By the end, I was exhausted but ready to tell the truth and let the jury decide if James deserved to be punished. The grand jury hearing took place in a small room with wood paneling and uncomfortable chairs. 12 people sat in 2 rows facing me. The prosecutor stood beside a table covered in documents and evidence photos. I held a tissue in my lap, but I did not cry. Verity sat in the back row. She gave me a small nod when I looked at her. The prosecutor asked me to state my name for the record. Then she asked me to describe my relationship with James. I started with the celebration dinner when he hit Amy. I described the bruise on her face, the purple and green marks that lasted for weeks. I told them about James grabbing my arm while I nursed our daughter, about the bruises he left on my skin. The prosecutor showed me photos the police took. I identified each mark and explained how it happened. Then she asked about leaving. I described packing our things while James was passed out, leaving my ring on the counter, the note I wrote. The prosecutor asked about the restraining order. I explained how James violated it constantly, the drive-bys of Amy's apartment, the texts from his friends' phones, the messages saying I belonged to him. She showed the jury screenshots I had saved, every violation documented with dates and times. Then she asked about Rebecca. I told them about her warning, the photos of her injuries from James, the NDA his parents paid her to sign, the missing woman who tried to warn James's next girlfriend. The prosecutor presented Rebecca's medical records, hospital reports showing broken ribs and a fractured eye socket, police reports Rebecca filed years ago. The grand jury members leaned forward in their seats. Some of them took notes. Others just stared at the evidence photos. I described the day James broke into Amy's apartment, how the restraining order had expired just an hour before, how his lawyer got it overturned, how James threatened Rebecca's life if I did not come with him. The prosecutor showed them the photo someone sent me Rebecca's car with another vehicle following close behind. Then I described being held at the house, James taking my phone and throwing it out the car window, Estelle waiting at the house with a smile. The new rules James laid out. No phone, no computer, no leaving without permission. The cameras I found hidden throughout the house. In the bathroom. In the bedroom. In the nursery where I slept with my daughter. The prosecutor presented the devices police recovered during their search. She asked me to identify each location where I found them. I pointed to photos of the bathroom, the bedroom, the nursery. The grand jury members looked disgusted. One woman covered her mouth with her hand. I told them about the recordings. How James monitored every conversation. How I found the device hidden in a stuffed animal. How I had to be careful about every word I said. The prosecutor asked about Detective Garza's visit. I described how James coached me on what to say. How he stood right there while I told the detective I was fine. How I tried to communicate the truth with my eyes, but I could not say the words. Then I described the day Detective Garza came with a warrant. How they searched the property and took evidence. How James cornered me afterward asking what I told police. The alcohol on his breath. The rage in his eyes. How close he got to hitting me again. The prosecutor asked about Estelle. I described her constant supervision. Her comments about family loyalty and supporting husbands. Her casual mention of learning these lessons herself years ago. How she watched me every moment. How she brought meals and made pointed remarks about wives staying in their place. The testimony lasted 3 hours. The prosecutor asked hundreds of questions. She showed photo after photo, document after document, medical records and police reports and text message screenshots. By the end, my voice was hoarse. My hands ached from gripping the tissue. But I got through it without breaking down. The prosecutor thanked me. She told the grand jury they would deliberate. Verity walked me out to the hallway. She said I did well, that my testimony was clear and detailed, that the evidence was overwhelming. 2 days later, Verity called with the results. The grand jury indicted James on multiple felony charges: kidnapping, assault, stalking, unlawful imprisonment. The prosecutor told Verity this was one of the strongest cases she had seen. The evidence was thorough. The testimony was compelling. Multiple victims with similar stories. A clear pattern of abuse enabled by family money. I hung up the phone and sat on my bed at the shelter. My daughter was napping in her crib. I looked at her peaceful face. For the first time since leaving James, I felt like justice might actually happen. The next week brought new problems. A woman I did not know called the shelter asking for me. Madison took the message. The woman said she was calling on behalf of Estelle. She had an offer to discuss. Madison told her I was not taking calls. The woman called back 3 more times. Each time Madison refused to put her through. Then letters started arriving. The shelter staff screened all mail. They showed me envelopes with law firm return addresses. Inside were offers. Drop the charges and Estelle would pay me $200,000. Work out a private custody arrangement. Sign an agreement never to discuss the case publicly. I refused immediately. I told Madison to document every attempt, every phone call, every letter, every offer. Verity said this demonstrated continued intimidation, that Estelle was trying to buy my silence just like she bought Rebecca's, that it strengthened our case even more. The prosecutor added witness tampering to the list of potential charges against Estelle. Madison told me about an opening in the transitional apartment program, affordable housing for domestic violence survivors, a 1-bedroom unit in a building across town, subsidized rent based on income, security features and support services. I applied immediately. The program accepted me within days. Moving day came 2 weeks after the grand jury hearing. Madison helped me pack the few things I had at the shelter, donated clothes and baby items. A used stroller someone gave me. The stuffed animals from the playroom my daughter loved. The apartment was small. 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a living room barely big enough for a couch. But it had a deadbolt and a security system. A building manager who knew about the program. Neighbors who looked out for each other. I furnished it with thrift store finds. A couch with faded fabric but sturdy frame. A kitchen table someone was giving away. A crib Madison helped me assemble. None of it matched. The couch was brown and the chair was blue. The kitchen table was wood but the chairs were metal. But it was mine. Every piece I chose. Every item I placed exactly where I wanted it. James did not know where it was. His name was not on the lease. He could not show up and demand entry. For the first time in months, I felt safe in my own space. I needed income. The shelter connected me with a job program. Remote data entry for a company that hired domestic violence survivors. Flexible hours I could work from home. Pay was not much, but it was something. I could do it while my daughter napped or played. The company sent me a laptop and login credentials. I started with 4 hours a day, entering numbers from scanned documents into spreadsheets. Simple work, but it required focus. The first paycheck arrived 2 weeks later. Direct deposit into the bank account I opened in my own name. $280 for 20 hours of work. I stared at the number on my phone screen. It was mine. Money I earned. Not James's money that he controlled. Not his parents' money with strings attached. Mine. I bought groceries with it. Diapers and formula. A new outfit for my daughter because she was growing so fast. The independence felt revolutionary. Each paycheck proved I could survive without James's control, that I could provide for my daughter on my own. Verity called with an update about James's case. The trial date was set for 4 months away. She explained the prosecution wanted to be thorough. They were building multiple cases, gathering evidence from all the victims, making sure the charges would stick. In the meantime, the restraining order was extended. James remained in custody because he violated bail conditions. He tried to contact me through Estelle. She called the jail and then called my old number. When that did not work, she tried to reach me through Amy. The prosecutor documented each violation. Each attempt at contact added to the case against him. Verity said James's lawyer was getting desperate, trying to negotiate a plea deal. But the prosecution was not interested yet. They wanted James to understand the full weight of what he was facing. Detective Garza asked to meet with me at a coffee shop near my apartment. He brought a file folder thick with documents. He ordered us both coffee and we sat at a corner table. He told me they uncovered new evidence during the investigation records from before James's father died. Police reports from other cities. Settlements paid to women who accused James's father of assault. The pattern went back 30 years. James's father used the same tactics. Isolate women, control them, hurt them, pay them off when they tried to leave. Estelle was one of his victims first. She married him young. He broke her arm twice, gave her a concussion, but she never left. Instead, she learned to enable him, to help him hide his violence, to protect the family reputation at any cost. When James's father died, she transferred that loyalty to James, defended his behavior, helped him control me, became an active participant instead of just a victim. Detective Garza said this information did not excuse her actions, but it helped explain the family dysfunction, why she defended James so fiercely, why she was willing to pay off victims and threaten witnesses. She learned from her own abuser that family reputation mattered more than truth. I thanked Detective Garza for telling me. Understanding the cycle did not make me forgive Estelle, but it helped me see that James's violence was not random. It was learned behavior, a pattern passed down through generations. Madison told me about a support group that met at the community center every Thursday evening. Domestic violence survivors who gathered to share stories and resources. She said it might help me feel less alone. I was nervous the first time I went. I brought my daughter in her stroller. The meeting room had folding chairs in a circle. 8 women were already there, ages ranging from early 20s to 60s. Some had children with them. Others came alone. The facilitator welcomed me. She explained the group rules. Everything shared stayed confidential. No one had to talk if they did not want to. We went around the circle introducing ourselves. I said my name and that I left my husband 6 weeks ago, that he was in jail awaiting trial. One woman squeezed my hand. Another nodded like she understood. They shared their stories. Some were years into recovery, living independently, working jobs, raising kids safely. Others were newer to freedom, still jumping at loud noises, still checking over their shoulders. One woman described her ex-husband's escalating control. Another talked about the first time he hit her. Their stories sounded like mine. Different details, but the same pattern. Isolation, control, violence, threats. Hearing them talk helped me feel less alone, less like I was crazy or dramatic or overreacting. These women understood. They lived through similar horror. Some of them were years past it now. They talked about trusting again, about feeling safe, about rebuilding lives. They gave me hope that eventually the fear would fade, that I would not always wake up panicking, that someday I might trust another person. My daughter had her 6-month checkup at the pediatrician's office near my apartment. I carried her in and checked in at the front desk. The nurse called us back. She weighed my daughter and measured her length, checked her reflexes and development. The pediatrician came in smiling. She examined my daughter thoroughly, listened to her heart and lungs, looked in her ears and throat. Then she sat back and made notes in the chart. She commented on how much healthier my daughter seemed, how she was meeting all her milestones, how her weight was good and her development was on track. She asked if anything had changed at home. I told her we moved to a safer place, that her father was not in the picture anymore. The pediatrician nodded. She said babies absorb stress from their environment, that my daughter probably felt the tension before even if she could not understand it, that children thrive in calm, stable homes. I looked at my daughter on the exam table. She was babbling and grabbing at the paper, smiling at the pediatrician. So different from the fussy, tense baby she was months ago. Knowing she was thriving made every hard choice worth it. Every scary moment, every sacrifice, every struggle, she was safe and healthy. That was what mattered. Rebecca called me one evening while I was making dinner. She sounded excited. She got a job at a nonprofit organization. They helped domestic violence survivors navigate legal systems, provided advocates who went to court with victims, explained legal processes and rights, connected people with lawyers and resources. Rebecca said she would be using her own experience to guide others, that turning her trauma into purpose felt healing. She described meeting with women who were where she was a year ago, scared and confused, facing abusers with money and lawyers, not knowing how to protect themselves. She could help them understand the system, warn them about tactics abusers use, support them through the legal process. She encouraged me to consider advocacy work once I was ready, said that helping others who survived what we survived could be powerful, that it gave meaning to the pain. I told her I would think about it, that right now I was focused on stability, but maybe someday I could do that work too. Verity called late one afternoon. Her voice was serious. She said the prosecutor made an offer to James, a plea deal, 15 years in prison in exchange for pleading guilty to all charges, and waiving custody rights permanently. 15 years. James would be locked away until my daughter was a teenager. He would miss her entire childhood. She would not remember him, would not grow up afraid of him. The custody rights meant he could never petition for visitation, could never try to see her. She would be completely safe from him. But there was another option. We could push for trial, risk a jury, maybe get a longer sentence, or maybe he would win and get less time, maybe keep some parental rights. The certainty of 15 years versus the gamble of trial. Verity said I had time to decide, that the prosecutor would wait for my answer, that this was my choice to make. I sat on my couch holding my phone. My daughter played on the floor with blocks. I watched her stack them and knock them down. Heard her laugh when they fell. 15 years of safety. 15 years of building a life without fear. 15 years before I had to face the possibility of him being free. I thought about the trial, about testifying in open court, about James sitting there watching me, about the risk of a jury believing his lies, about the chance he could get out sooner. I looked at my daughter again. She was everything, my whole world. Keeping her safe was the only thing that mattered. The certainty of 15 years was worth more than gambling for 20. I called Verity the next morning and told her I wanted to accept the deal. She asked if I was sure, and I looked at my daughter playing with blocks on the floor and said yes. 15 years of safety was better than risking a trial where anything could happen. Verity said she would contact the prosecutor and set up the plea hearing. 3 weeks later, I sat in the courtroom gallery with Amy on my left and Rebecca on my right. 2 other women I had never met sat behind us. Survivors who had come forward after hearing about the case. James stood at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit with his hands cuffed in front of him. The judge asked him to allocate to each charge, which meant he had to admit out loud what he did. His voice was flat and emotionless as he said he kidnapped me, that he assaulted me and Amy, that he stalked Rebecca and violated her NDA. He listed each crime like he was reading a grocery list. No remorse in his tone. I felt Amy's hand squeeze mine and I squeezed back. The prosecutor asked follow-up questions, making him provide details about specific incidents. James answered each one mechanically, and I realized he was only doing this to avoid a longer sentence, not because he felt sorry. When the allocution finished, the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement before sentencing. I stood up and walked to the microphone they set up for victims. I looked at James for the first time since entering the courtroom and told the judge that my daughter deserved to grow up without fear, that she deserved a mother who was safe and stable, that 15 years meant she would be nearly grown before having to decide if she wanted contact with him. I sat back down and the judge nodded. She accepted the plea and sentenced James to 15 years in state prison with no early parole. She made a point of saying that the survivors who came forward showed remarkable courage and that domestic violence would not be tolerated in her courtroom. 2 officers moved forward to take James away, and he turned to look at me one last time. But I was already standing up to leave because he was no longer the most important thing in my life. My daughter was waiting with the babysitter, and I needed to get back to her. Verity finalized my divorce over the next few weeks, and the custody arrangement was part of the plea deal. James's parental rights were terminated completely, which meant he could never petition for visitation or try to be part of my daughter's life. The legal bills came to over $20,000, which seemed impossible, until Verity told me about a domestic violence legal fund that covered most of it. I set up a payment plan for the remaining $3,000, paying $200 a month. It would take over a year to finish, but it was manageable with my job at the shelter. Around the same time, I heard through Verity that Estelle was charged with conspiracy and intimidation of witnesses. The prosecutor had evidence that she knew about the surveillance of Rebecca and had helped coordinate some of James's actions. Estelle took a plea deal that included 2 years of probation and a restraining order keeping her away from me and my daughter. Verity mentioned that Estelle was selling the family house to pay her legal fees, and I felt nothing but relief. My daughter would never have to be around that toxic influence or hear Estelle's excuses for James's behavior. 6 months after James's sentencing, I moved into my own apartment outside the transitional program. I had been working full-time at an office job that provided benefits and childcare assistance, and I saved enough for a security deposit and first month's rent. Amy helped me move my donated furniture and thrift store finds into the small 2-bedroom unit. We ordered pizza and ate it sitting on the floor of my empty living room while my daughter crawled between us. Then my daughter pulled herself up using the wall and took 3 wobbly steps toward Amy before falling on her bottom. We both cheered and my daughter clapped her hands and laughed. It was the first time she walked and I was so glad Amy was there to see it. The apartment was mine. My name on the lease, my furniture inside, my daughter taking her first steps in our home. Nobody could take it away or use it to control me. A few months into working full-time, I enrolled in community college classes toward a degree in social work. I wanted to help other women escape situations like mine, to be the person who understood what they were going through because I had lived it. The schedule was exhausting with work during the day, classes 2 evenings a week, and parenting the rest of the time. But I was building a future where I was not just surviving anymore, I was actually living with purpose and goals that were mine, not something James decided for me. My daughter started daycare at the college's childcare center, which made the logistics easier. She played with other kids while I sat in classes learning about trauma responses and legal advocacy. Rebecca called me one Saturday and asked if I wanted to volunteer at the domestic violence shelter where Madison worked. She had started going once a week to help new residents navigate the legal system and understand their options. I agreed and we went together the following weekend. Madison introduced us to 3 women who had recently left abusive partners, and we spent the afternoon explaining restraining orders, custody processes, and safety planning. One woman asked how long it took before the fear went away, and I told her honestly that I still had bad days, but they were getting fewer. Sharing my story with women who were where I was a year ago hurt, but it also felt healing. And I could see in their eyes that my survival gave them hope that they could survive too. Rebecca and I made plans to volunteer together every other Saturday, and Madison said the shelter needed people like us, who understood what the residents were facing. My daughter's first birthday arrived on a warm spring day, and I threw her a small party at my apartment. Amy came early to help me set up decorations and balloons. Rebecca arrived with a cake she had baked herself. Verity stopped by between court hearings with a wrapped present. Detective Garza came with his wife, bringing a stuffed animal that my daughter immediately hugged. Madison brought flowers and stayed for an hour before heading back to the shelter. 3 women from my support group came with their own children, and the apartment filled with noise and laughter. I watched my daughter smash her face into the cake while everyone sang happy birthday, and I looked around at all the people who had helped save us. The community that formed around my crisis and carried me through it was now celebrating this milestone with me. My daughter would grow up knowing these people, seeing what real support and friendship looked like. I started sleeping through the night without nightmares most of the time around then. I could hear unexpected noises like a door closing or footsteps in the hallway without panicking that James was coming for me. The constant vigilance that made me check locks 3 times and jump at shadows was fading slowly. My therapist said I was making remarkable progress in processing the trauma and building a healthy life. Some nights I still woke up scared, but I could calm myself down and fall back asleep instead of staying awake until dawn. My daughter slept peacefully in her room, and I could rest knowing we were safe. The fear was not gone completely, but it was not controlling my life anymore. A few months later, Amy helped me pack our bags for a weekend trip to a beach 2 hours away. I loaded the car with my daughter's toys and snacks while Amy double-checked that we had everything we needed. We drove with the windows down and music playing, and I kept looking in the rearview mirror just to see my daughter smiling in her car seat. The beach was small and quiet, with only a few other families scattered across the sand. We spread out our blanket, and my daughter immediately grabbed handfuls of sand, laughing as it slipped through her tiny fingers. Amy and I built a lopsided sandcastle while my daughter knocked it down over and over, squealing with joy each time. We walked along the water's edge collecting shells, and I realized I was not checking my phone every 5 minutes or looking over my shoulder. Nobody knew where we were. Nobody was tracking my location or demanding explanations. I could just exist in this moment with my daughter and my best friend, and the freedom of it made my chest feel light. We ate sandwiches on the beach and watched the sunset, and when my daughter fell asleep against my shoulder, I understood that this simple weekend was something I had never experienced before. 2 years later, I walked across a stage in a black cap and gown to accept my associate degree in social work. My daughter sat in the front row wearing a little pink dress, clapping her hands together and calling out for me. Amy was next to her recording everything on her phone with tears running down her face. I shook hands with the college president and held up my diploma. Looking out at the small crowd of people who helped me get here, I had a job starting next month at a nonprofit that helped abuse survivors navigate the legal system and find resources. My apartment was small, but it was mine, with my name on the lease and locks that only I controlled. I had friends who showed up when I needed them, and a daughter who would grow up watching me build a life on my own terms. The future was not perfect, and I still had hard days, but it belonged to me. That's how it played out for me. But I already know some of you have a totally different view. Share it in the comments, I'll be reading them later.